Cicero, who's the new man I'm talking about, was the very first in his family to serve in the Roman Senate. He does not have an elite pedigree like many of his senatorial colleagues. He made his way into the Senate largely, at least in his mind, on the basis of merit. He would have had quite a few patrons as well that would have helped him along the way. He is not originally from the city of Rome. He comes actually from a similar part of Rome, of Italy, that Gaius Marius come from. His family knows Marius's family really, really well. Now, Cicero, for reasons I'll get into in a little bit, does not use those connections. So he could have allied with Marius's family, but obviously there's that family's very polarizing, right? So there are some reasons why Cicero does not ally with him. Instead, Cicero's big ally for much of his early career and mid-career is Pompey. So Pompey is out winning victories, and Cicero is doing some things in Rome that are, in some ways, are kind of preparing the way for Pompey to come back. And Pompey and Cicero, if they didn't meet earlier, definitely met during the Social War. So this is right in the early 80s BC. Pompey was serving under his father. If you remember, Pompey's father's name was Pompey Strabo, or Pompey the Butcher, brutal man. Cicero was also a military tribune under Pompey Strabo, but Cicero is like not interested in commanding armies or anything like that. You get the impression that he served as military tribune really because he kind of had to, just as a Roman elite, and that he really did, if you look at the rest of his career, he shows almost no interest in commanding armies, which is a huge disadvantage to him in terms of winning status and glory. But he, like I said, he's able to do some things that accomplish this just a different way. So Cicero is, like I said, under Pompey Strabo, and what he does in the late 80s BC is he begins to serve as an advocate. He begins to serve as an advocate in the court system. That's where he initially makes his way as a kind of important person in Rome. One of his earliest cases is probably his most surprising. Unfortunately, we know very little about this court case. This is in the late 80s BC. Sulla is dictator. Cicero is in his early 30s, because he's born in 106 BC. So by the late 80s, he's in his early 30s. He's serving in the courts, and he's arguing cases on behalf of defendants. There's a lot of activity in the courts because Sulla's henchmen and allies are prosecuting the people that were on Sulla's kill list. You remember that was the prescriptions. These are these are people that are enemies of Sulla that have their lives and their property forfeit. It's the second worst list you could have possibly be on in history. Cicero is defending some of the people that are being prosecuted, including a man who we don't know, I don't think we know his name, who was accused of murdering his own father. And the real murderers were allies of Sulla. In fact, one of them was one of Sulla's freedmen. So very, very close associates with Sulla. And there was no chance that Cicero's client, who was trying to defend himself against Sullan loyalists, was going to get off. And yet Cicero, again, we don't have the speech, but Cicero got this guy off. He was able to win an acquittal. Now, he wasn't able to prosecute the real murderers. They do go scot-free. But at least a man who was being framed was acquitted of the charge, which is a big win for Cicero in the midst of a political climate which was obviously very pro-Sullan. Then, in the year 75 BC...
Colin,
yeah.
Do you want to clarify, his client isn't a personal client, or a client is just the general person?
Sorry, yeah, a client that he's advocating for in the courts. Although, I don't know if he would also have been his personal client, because if he's advocating for him, in theory, you're not supposed to take money from people you represent in the courts. So it would make sense if this person was actually Cicero's client. So I just don't know the details. Thanks, Laura, for asking. So then in 75 BC, so now So then a few years have gone by, and in 75 BC, Cicero runs for quaestor. He is able to secure that office in his first year of eligibility, which I guess would make him 30. So I did my math wrong. Late 80s BC would have been in his mid-20s, in his mid-20s. So now that he's 30 years old in 75 BC, he runs for quaestor and serves in Sicily. That's important because Cicero will get to know some Sicilian elites. He will develop friendly relationships with them, patronage relationships with them too, and they will draw upon that relationship with him later. So he goes into Sicily. Cicero is a tried and true aristocrat. He has this immediate fidelity to the people that he joins, right? And this, I've mentioned this to you before, as a new man coming out of a non-noble background, it kind of makes sense that he would want to distance himself from the people he came from and try to assimilate to the people into which he is joining. And he will be a voracious defender, almost in an absurd way at sometimes, of the aristocracy. He will make a lot of enemies of the populares, right? These people that are like Julius Caesar, like some other people we'll be introduced to, Clodius Pulcher, Verres, Catiline, right? There are some other populares politicians that Cicero just does not get along with, and he will suffer a little bit for this, which we'll get into in just a second. One of the ways that we see Cicero's loyalty to the aristocracy almost immediately is after 75 BC, he is eligible to run for tribune of the plebs a couple of years later. So he would face the opportunity to run for tribune of the plebs just a couple of years later. He does not run for that office. He just chooses to ignore running for that office. Now, I don't know, this is not a top-hat question, but based on what you know, there are a few different right answers to this question, about Cicero or about that office, why might Cicero not have run for that office? Why might he have chosen to not do this? Would be about maybe 73 BC or so, yeah. That's the big one. If you didn't hear that right, Sulla's restrictions on this office are still in effect. So if he runs for tribune of the plebs, as you rightly say, he can't run for any other office. So that is the big one, right? That's the big thing going on there. And Cicero he's very ambitious for a career. He's not just satisfied to come into the Senate and be the first in his family to be a senator. He has got very high aims, and we will see that in his career. Probably the first place that we really see him taking on some big movers and shakers in Rome is with the trial of a guy named Verres. Verres had been praetor in 74 BC, and Verres then takes a province out in Sicily, the very place that Cicero just was a few years earlier. So these are people that Cicero knows. And Verres is governor of Sicily for 3 years. He takes a very long stint as governor there from 73 to 70 BC. So very, very long 3 years. Now, why does Verres spend so much time in Sicily? Because he wants to loot that province. He is absolutely over the top in what he does, at least according to Cicero. And we have some of Cicero's speeches detailing the accusations that were made against this guy, Verres. Verres, for example, had one of his lictors, right? Because he's a governor, he gets these lictors, these guys that carry along the bundle of rods with the axe in them, right, to remind everybody that he can enact capital punishment. So Verres has one of his lictors billeted, right? He forces a homeowner to host this guy in his house, and then Verres is like, well, I realize this guy, you don't want him in your house. Why don't you give me your daughter for the night, and we'll pull the guy out of the house. This, of course, causes an uproar in this little town in Sicily, because this is like a local nobleman that does not want to just give his daughter to the Roman governor to have his way with her. And there ends up being like a near riot and a fight. and the lictor ends up getting killed in the fight, and the father and son under Verres are executed for their role in the fight. But of course it was Verres who provoked this whole conflict. Another thing that Verres would do is he would seize works of art. He was a real art collector, and so he would go to Sicilian towns and he would say, well, I need to inspect the art. And he would make sure to bring it to me and I'll give it back. And then he would never give it back. He would just take it into his palace. He'd hold on to it. And by the way, his palace in Sicily, his household in Sicily was funded by cash that he expropriated from the Sicilians. They were supposed to be paying grain taxes to him, which would then go to the Roman state. Instead, he made them pay cash instead of grain, and he used that to pay for a very lavish lifestyle, including this art that he took from people. He would even have, this includes like stuff in temples, stuff on public display, statues of great heroes in these Sicilian towns. He's taking their heritage. This isn't just he's taking stuff that's valuable from them, right? He's taking things, there are lots of little towns in Indiana that mine does this too. Like there are war memorials, there are like things that there's some Civil War graves in my Indiana town. Imagine someone just taking those, right, from the town, like how devastated people would be. And that's what he's doing. He's not just taking things that are valuable because they're economically valuable. He's taking people's history and heritage. And this is, of course, deeply upsetting. The people that were doing wrong things in the province, people that were brought before him as judge, because he's governor, so he's also judge, he willingly takes bribes, right? He would willingly take bribes from people who were obviously guilty of crimes, and they would be acquitted. No. Cicero says that he would take bribes from people, and then he would convict them. So he wasn't even honest enough to be a decent briber, right? He wouldn't even do that. So this is like really odious to Romans, right? If you're going to be bribed, at least be honest about it. This is just really upsetting to the Romans. He extracted money from one Sicilian town to use on a ship that he then used to carry all of this loot away with him on the ship. Like he had them even pay for the ship that he used to take all this art and statues and gold and everything that he took from these people. He was obviously embezzling from the Roman state. I mean, much of what he was supposed to do was to collect grain and taxes for the Roman state, and he was keeping a wildly disproportionate amount of it, which of course presents a problem not just for Verres, but for the Roman state. We read in Cicero's first speech against Verres that he had so distributed the 3 years of his Sicilian praetorship, that's the pro-praetorship, right? That's him being a governor, that's what that means, that he should say he did exceedingly well if he appropriated the gains of the first year to augmenting his own property. So the first year is for him, the second year is to go to his patrons and the people that help him, and boy is it, he really paid off a lot of people. That's one thing that Cicero brings up in his trial. And then he reserved the third year, the most productive and gainful of all, for the judges. So this was a thoroughly corrupt man. He gained for himself, then he paid off his allies, and then he paid off the judges who he knew would be prosecuting him when he returns back to Rome. And, he was an intimidating figure, but fortunately for the Sicilians, they knew Cicero. And some of them were his clients. And so they were able to reach out to Cicero, despite the fact that Verres not only intimidated the Sicilians, but he had his publicani, the people who were tax farming in the province, he had them destroy, right, all the documents, right? Paper shredders, right, were going like crazy in those last few months right before he goes back to Rome so that he can get away with all of this. And obviously the publicani are making out very well in his province too, so there's kind of this unholy alliance, which would have been not uncommon in Roman provinces. It's just that Verres abuses went beyond kind of the normal, tolerable limits of corruption. I don't think corruption was uncommon. Corruption seems to have been reasonably common. but at the level, like quantitatively, that Verres pursued it, that was uncommon, at least as Cicero argues it. So that's one thing. The other reason that Cicero went after Verres is also because he, you could make the claim that what he was doing was against Rome's economic interests. I mean, he is embezzling from the Roman state. He's not just enriching himself and being corrupt personally. He's like Sicily is one of 2 grain-producing provinces, as you know. That is vital to feeding the city of Rome. It's vital to preventing food riots. You cannot just take so much grain, right, that you risk a food riot in the city of Rome. And Cicero, obviously, is going to use this as an argument in his case. And initially, it does not look like Cicero's prosecution of Verres is going to go well for 2 reasons. The current guy that Verres gets is a guy named Hortensius. He is the incoming consul. So he's been elected consul late in 70 BC, and he is going to be the next consul. And he is like at the prime of his career. He is I don't know if he had not lost a court case or he had only lost a few. I mean, he was very well respected in the courts. This was the superstar attorney, basically, that Verres had got secured. So that's part of what makes his case look unassailable. The other thing is that although the current judge of the case, who is the urban praetor, and I don't remember his name, it begins with a G. Anyway, the current urban praetor is not susceptible to bribery. But again, the year is almost out. There's going to be a new praetor coming in. And so what Verres does is he actually uses some of his money from Sicily to pay for a fake prosecution against him. One that he can control and that will just kind of drag out a trial so that it never actually comes to a verdict, and then the old praetor will go away, the one that's not very corruptible, right? The Commissioner Gordon figure, right? And then, or the Harvey Dent figure, and then the new guy will come in who Verres hopes to be able to bribe. So there's 2 tactics that he is able to use. Verres, like I said, is able to delay trial, and Cicero not only uses his opportunity in court to talk about Verres, but he's talking about the failure of the court system too. And this is a very clever idea, and I'll explain why in a second. So Cicero says, an opinion is, this is right at the beginning of, this is before he launches into what Verres has done. This is how he sets up his argument. There is an opinion that we all know, it's pernicious to us and pernicious to the Republic. It's the common, this is something everybody knows about in Rome, and it's known everywhere. That our courts, right, the Roman courts, Roman law, they're supposed to be the best courts, the best law. This is supposed to be the seat of civilization. That in our courts, a wealthy man, even if he is guilty, will not be convicted. That's what Cicero says to the jury, to the judge and jury. He's basically saying, I don't recognize the incorruptibility of this court. These courts have been terrible. Now, why is he saying this? Who is consul? Who are the consuls in 70 BC? Do you remember who they are? You remember the 2 men that are consuls in 70 BC? Anybody remember? Very, very famous people that we talked about. Yeah.
Are they the 2 Sulla allies?
Yes. You remember what their names are?
Actually, I think he died. Never mind.
That's all right. Anybody remember who their names are? Yeah.
Crassus and Pompey.
Crassus and Pompey. Crassus and Pompey are consuls, and since nobody really quite remembered their name, I won't ask you then what they were doing. What they were doing was, right, they were undoing all of Sulla's restrictions, including Sulla's act that put a monopoly of the corruption court juries in the hands of the Senate. Remember, Sulla had undone the Gracchan reforms that had put equestrians into those juries, and he had put senators. So this was an open question, like, will Pompey and Crassus, remove the senators from the juries. And so that's why Cicero does this. Normally this would really piss off a court and a judge, right, to tell them that they're corrupt. But what he's reminding them of is, hey, you are about to get removed from the juries if you do not prosecute one of your own. You have got to, Verres of all people has got to be found guilty, or you guys are going to find yourself not controlling the corruption courts anymore. And that was why Cicero does this. It's bold, right? It takes some boldness to do this. And it's effective, right? It's going to. We'll see what it leads to for the result. It was unfortunate for the senators, though, because obviously Pompey and Crassus do ultimately take them off the juries. So it doesn't really work out for them. But that's his argument there. So to the verdict, right? What you've read some of what. Let me see. Did I have one more thing? Yeah, this is just Cicero, right, speaking more about corruption. No sooner was Verres back from his province that he bought up this court. Are you saying this to those people? He's like telling this to people that are there. You have been bought. I know that Verres has given you bribes, right? So that's why he's doing all of this. He's aware of the political situation right now. Verres goes into voluntary exile. He realizes that he is not going to win, right? The political climate is bad for him. That Cicero, and if you want some depressing reading sometime, read Cicero's speeches against Verres. I mean, it is so, like, what he accuses this guy of is just deep, corrupt, depraved things. Again, if a tenth of what Cicero says is true, this guy was truly nasty. And he leaves Rome, goes into a kind of voluntary exile. His property becomes forfeit. And this obviously achieves for Cicero a huge, is a huge boost to his profile, right, in the city of Rome. And Cicero then runs for aedile the next year. So in 69 BC, Cicero runs for aedile, and he is elected. Now, this is also the first year that he's eligible. So he gets in the first year he's eligible to quaestor. He gets in he skips tribune of the plebs. Gets in the first year that he's eligible for aedile, and then in 66 BC, which is the first year he's eligible for the praetorship, he gets that. So Cicero is doing very well for never having really commanded armies. Okay, he's made it all the way up to praetor, and he has never seriously commanded an army. He was a military tribune, but if we read Plutarch's life of Cicero, it sounds to me like Cicero was not, he didn't even want to hold a sword. He was not interested in fighting in the social war really much at all.
Thank you so much for checking out this video. I encourage you, if you'd like to get more free Roman history content, check out my podcast, the Pax Romana Podcast, P-A-X Romana Podcast. It is available anywhere you can find podcasts, so Spotify, Apple Music, all of those places. And if you would, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. You can also subscribe to the channel, and all of those things will help boost the channel in the YouTube algorithm. Finally, if you're interested in following me on X, you can do so by looking for me at Prof CPE, P-R-O-F CPE. Thanks so much for watching the video. We'll catch you next time.